Okay, the
Basically,
recording is on.
yeah.
Welcome, community. We spent some time discussing this framework, JavaScript. That's not actually JavaScript. It's JavaScript framework, but without using JavaScript for the developers. HTMX surfaced on our radar this week, and we discussed a little bit today. If you want to learn more about it, go to htmx.org and read about it. We can like say a couple of words later. And back to you, Lucas. You wanted to show us something with React, P React
Yeah,
or React P?
P React.
P React. Okay.
Yeah, 3 kilobytes alternative to React with the same modern API.
Hmm.
It's
Okay.
also interesting.
But how
Yeah,
do they develop? You said is they using it for AMP developing.
yeah.
How is it?
Basically, you have those. Let's look at amp.dev, amp website. Let's look at the components. They are all made, they are all looking, for example, like this.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to include some kind of script for each component that is like not standard. And they look like this. And I guess they internally develop them as React components.
Mm-hmm.
My guess, a little bit more difficult maybe, but yeah. Yeah. Basically, that's also how you can, with amp lists, that's also similar to stuff from HTMX
HTMX. Yeah.
because you're also fetching data from some kind of API and can display this also. Yeah.
An API looks like just a simple file in this case. Could be just a
Yeah.
simple static
This is a
file.
simple JSON file.
Yeah.
What else did they do? They have some other stuff. AMP batches, blah blah blah, HTML, XML, HTTP requests to JSON endpoints, blah blah blah.
So underneath, it's still using XML, HTTP, whatever response. Forgetting the
Yeah,
name, but it's
yeah,
Ajax,
those,
right? It's Ajax.
yeah, yeah,
So
basically.
we were talking before that we this frameworks with these frameworks you get rid of Ajax, but
Hmm.
it seems like underneath under the bonnet they're still using it.
Yeah. And the interesting fact is that you can refresh lists also with this. You have with AMP, you have these on events, and then you have also have a tab event, and then you can do my list dot refresh. And here my list is defined. Yeah. It's also very
Hmm.
interesting. You can also do a lot of dynamic stuff with AMP, for example. Um,
Hmm.
this seems kind of similar to mm, what what this what HTMX can do. For example, also you can have your list here in an AMP state, which is basically a way to deal with JSON objects in AMP. Then you can also access it here. Mm, this is really interesting. You can also write JavaScript to fetch your list. It's really interesting. I didn't know all of that stuff. Seems to be kind of a newer feature to it. What
Hmm.
else is there? Yeah.
The thing is seem to be developing further pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think they are also having pagination, basically like this load more buttons. And what else is there? Um, I wanted to see something. There is also I'm not sure if it's here, but there is some kind of live list that can like update in like a with like periodic updates that updates like every 5 seconds or something. Stuff like this is also possible. Yeah, really interesting stuff. But let's switch back to HTMX. Let's see what they can do. Yeah. You also have those. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's
Oh,
really interesting that they have these um, kind of requests, Ajax requests also for these other HTML methods, HTTP methods. Yeah,
yeah, that's interesting. That's actually interesting. So your form is not only limited to post and get anymore. You can
yeah,
use more calls or more like different call types.
yeah.
Interesting.
Well, let's read this. This sounds interesting. HTMX in a nutshell. Um, HTMX is a library that allows you to access modern browser features directly from HTML rather than using JavaScript. To understand HTMX, first let's take a look at an anchor tag. This anchor tag tells the browser when a user clicks on the link, issue an HTTP GET request to /blog and load the response content into the browser window. With that in mind, consider the following bit of HTML. Mm, okay, we have a kind of HTTP post request to another URL and also a on a click event. And the target is some kind of parent div and it will swap the some kind of the the HTML. Let's see what they're actually doing. This tells HTMX when a user clicks on this button, issue an HTTP post request to /clicked, this URL, and the or this path to be more precise, and use the content from the response to replace the element with the ID parent div in the DOM. Interesting. Mm. HTMX extends and generalizes the core idea of HTML as a hypertext, opening up many more possibilities directly within the language. Now, any element, not just anchor text and forms, can issue an HTTP request. It's really interesting. Mm. Now, any event, not just clicks or form submissions, can trigger requests. This is also very interesting. Now, any HTTP verb, not just get and post, can be used. Now, any element, not just the entire window, can be the target for update by the request. Um, this is really interesting, so you don't have to reload every time the whole document with all its kind of dependencies or all the other um, files included with it, but just like a small fraction of the page. Yeah. Note that when you are using HTMX on the server side, you typically respond with HTML, not JSON. This keeps you firmly within the original web programming model, using hypertext as the engine application state without even needing to really understand that concept. This is really interesting. So you thought that you're responding with HTML. Yeah.
Yeah, but it has a pros and cons. With once you're responding with JSON, you can use it in your app maybe also the same like a backend. What
Hmm.
with HTML, maybe you need then to adapt it. I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking if browsers could get rid, because the look further below you, there was like installing part. If you scroll down
Yeah.
to install this package, actually you only have to insert this script tag in your on your page, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's 10K library, 10 kilobytes library,
Let's
and
see if
it
that's
will
true.
do the magic.
Let's see if that's true.
It's zipped, so yeah, once you unpack it's bigger. But if browsers would take care of it, maybe you would not need to include it anymore. If they would support it without a JavaScript package. It means
Mhm.
you could live theoretically like completely without JavaScript. What will be an interesting thing. This is what AMP wanted, right? Like a very either no JavaScript or very very minimal or standardized JavaScript,
Yeah.
like basic
Yeah.
functionality only.
Yeah. But what they are doing as well is that you have many, I think what this does is that you have to build lots of backend um, um, backend logic that returns actually HTML. In my what I could see is that many people are using this with PHP also, which I don't really like, but that's just my opinion. Um, um, but yeah, so it's basically also a very dynamic format that really um, interacts with the server side. And AMP was more for just one static site without many um, dynamic parts in it. It was,
Mhm.
I think, mostly for like online publishing. Um, so you basically have one file with the style sheet in it and nothing else, and just a single very lightweight HTML page. And I think what this a little bit more aims to do is to make it more dynamic. So you can really um, send, receive, and manipulate your HTML and make this like more alive. Yeah, it's really interesting. I could really see some kind of use cases for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just thought, for the sake of using it actively, because if you just go through documentation and that's it, you will forget it, you will not
Mhm.
be catching up like with the development. To use it like on a small project, where
Yeah.
it would be sufficient with some stupid backend logic maybe included.
Yeah. Mhm.
I
Another
always
thing
try to do it. Yeah. Go on.
what I think about this is that maybe uh, I'm not sure if it's better to use like normal JavaScript frameworks where you have APIs that just serve the data, and
Hmm.
because with this kind of framework you don't really like separate the actual um, program from the data. With JavaScript frameworks, you have an API that serves just the data, and you have all of the um, program logic and all of the UI separate from that. And with this framework HTMX, it's basically merged together. So
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure. Could depend on what you actually need, but yeah.
Hmm. Okay. I think it was nice. Side jump to a slightly different technology, but still interesting,
Mhm.
and it's emerged just recently. I mean, there are popping up talks about it, like in November, now beginning December. So it spreads like crazily. nice too. And nice, we kind of catched up with a lot of technologies nowadays. So whenever something new surfaces, we we are jumping on it, looking into it.
Yeah,
That's great, actually. We
yeah,
feel more or
it's
less like
true.
up to date, with web technologies. What is great, really.
Yeah, yeah. When I first heard HTMX, just as another addition to that topic, I thought that it sounded like very old school because
Mm.
I knew something very old that had the name XHTML, which was
Hmm.
some kind of GNU project. Um,
Yeah, there was an interesting story, a kind of almost a battle between
or,
V3C organization recently. It's not like super old.
or at
Um,
least I think
yeah.
XHTML is another old school name for HTML because it uses XML.
Hmm.
It's mostly.
It's some kind of intermediary standard. Someone suggested it didn't get adopted really well, and everything was replaced by HTML5, what is the
Mm,
standard nowadays. But interestingly, HTML5, as we know it, is not a product of a V3C organization, the
really?
standardization body. Yeah. So what happened there? Like I'm trying
Yeah,
to retell the Wikipedia article I went through and some articles I read about it yesterday, I think. So Google, Microsoft, and a couple of other major companies, and I think Mozilla were also among them. So basically, the biggest browser um, producers, they created their own organization. Exactly, it's called
yeah.
WhatVG,
The
and
the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group.
yes. So
Very
for
simple
them,
name.
yeah, it doesn't matter. But for them, the V3C were too slow and too kind of I don't know. They did have a lot of discussions, and they could never like get things done. Seems like so they created their own consortia or like separate organization, like a parallel organization, where they implemented quickly the ideas they need for for their HTML standard. And
Mhm.
but V3C continued in on their slow pace to develop HTML5 as they saw it, kind of right. But
Yeah,
at the end, whatever V3C develops, if browsers don't adopt it, it's just a theory.
yeah.
So this other organization, what VG, is actually a consortia of all browser producers.
Basically, yeah, you can see
Yeah,
the members
Apple
here.
and
Google,
Google, Microsoft,
Microsoft,
Mozilla,
Mozilla.
and I think Opera is also there, but don't.
They were listed as a founding member,
Yeah,
but I'm not sure if they're still part of it. Yeah.
nowadays I think
So,
Opera or Opera, whatever, however they called, they also using the same Chromium foundation from Google.
yeah.
So it's not even a completely different engine. It's
Okay.
pretty much the same engine.
And this browser still exists.
Yeah, the browser is a brand. Probably it's white labeled as Edge browser from Microsoft. It can be. It's easy, The core is done. You only need to put some whistles and and things on it to
Yeah.
make it different looking, and that's it.
Okay.
No worries, Utkarsh. Yeah, so that's interesting. It's not. It was not a war, but kind of a parallel development. But at the end, V3C adopted all the changes that this other organization introduced. So we have HTML5, as we know. It's basically the product of this what VG. What's also interesting, like political move, because they just created basically their own standard. And
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucas, let's keep it short this time. Our our only member dropped off now from the call. Hopefully, a couple of more people will watch it in the recording. But today we explored slightly, like had a look at a
Yeah.
interesting and promising JavaScript framework, which is not doesn't require JavaScript knowledge to
Yeah.
use it. What is nice.
Like
Yeah.
basically an HTML framework made with
Yes, yes,
JavaScript
yeah. They
or an
call it like
HTML
hyper
extension. Yeah.
markup, hyper, whatever, like whatever it's called, right? But that's
Yeah.
what's interesting, like a journey, I guess. And yeah, let's keep it short for today. Next time
Yeah.
I will be better prepared, hopefully, and know other
Me
things in
too.
parallel so that we can have
Yeah.
a full time session.
Yeah. Hopefully
Okay.
also with some members joining. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, so have a nice
Okay.
rest of the weekend, and
Yeah.
see you next week.
You too. I will
Oh,
stop the recording.
sure.